I have been a massive fan of the werewolf genre since I was a kid and saw bits of artwork in an old comic book / curiosity store of a terrifying looking wolfman creature. The damn thing made me nervous to even enter the shop because I knew I would see that thing on the wall. It was an image of pure menace and ferocious intent, and yet, whenever I was in that part of the town, I had to pop in and see that hulking evil monster with the dripping fangs leering down at me. It is part of the human experience to seek out things that scare us, and either embrace and conquer that fear, or when faced with it, run and hide. In my case, it became a bit of an obsession, and so I delved into the occult, read everything I could get my hands on, and watched many old movies. Sadly, that shop closed a long time ago, but the vision of that artwork still remains, and my love for the genre has never dampened. And so when a new movie featuring werewolves comes out, it always catches my interest, and Werewolf by Night with its vintage movie aesthetic seemed worth a look. There are a couple of problems though, and I think you can probably guess what they are. There was a time when Marvel used to be evocative of great comics. It used to make you think about awesome cartoons. It used to make you look forward to a trip to the cinema. But that was in the past. These days, if something is made by Marvel, the predominant sensation upon hearing of it is horror and worry that it's going to be woke. The characters are going to be race swapped or gender swapped. The story is going to be at best a bastardization of an original story that spends all its time demonizing certain parts of society and having cringeworthy social commentary. And what is worse these days is that as well as the Marvel tag being a byline for woke, it is now joined by what is arguably a logo that fills all within eyeshot with a sickening sense of foreboding, so strong that a volcano erupting outside the window would be a secondary worry. After all, the volcano is an equal opportunities calamity, whereas Disney is coming for your children. That said, it is still about werewolves, and so I was always going to give it a look. And the first word that comes to my mind to describe it is goofy. I would like to have been able to use words like intense, horrifying, menacing, scary, original, but I can't because it's none of these things. Imagine any word you've ever heard of to describe a horror movie that wasn't a comedy. Those words would not describe this short film. I guess if I were to push myself, we could apply the word interesting to it, since it was certainly that. When it started, I thought, oh, it's in black and white. That's very noir and interesting. But by the end, I had to completely rethink my expectations, because in the bright light of dawn, when all the werewolves have shrunk back to their mundane human forms, this movie is basically just a comedic commercial for the monster genre of Marvel Comics. It is more comedy than action-adventure, and has nothing at all to say about horror in general, and even less about werewolves in particular. The entirety of its werewolf content is confined to the last 5 minutes of the program, and when it comes, it is far from impressive. Let's start from the top. The plot is actually fairly interesting, and would have made for a classic Hammer or Amicus horror movie, and in fact, there are some similarities to The Beast Must Die. First off, a group of people are gathered together for a special purpose. A monster gets hunted, people are killed, and someone is a werewolf. Werewolf by Night starts out pretty well, and its interesting film noir aesthetic really does draw you in and make you feel as though this is going to be an interesting ride. It begins with a bunch of monster hunters all gathered in the same place because Ulysses Bloodstone has died. And since he has no heir, because his daughter ran away many years ago, he had decided that the best way to choose the next owner of the mystical Bloodstone, which gives him his name, is to have a monster hunt with the successful hunter claiming the stone, or as he puts it, the one who survives. His daughter Elsa, it turns out, is also there because she, I think she just wants the money. I mean, she is a girl after all. Gucci handbags and Jimmy Choos don't buy themselves. She may also want to stick it to her dad and reclaim her inheritance. Or something. But anyway, among the hunters is an ambiguously foreign-looking man named Jack Russell. And yes, I'm pretty sure he is named after the dog. After all, naming a werewolf after a wicket-keeper just seems unlikely. How's that? Jack Russell is not actually a monster hunter. He is in fact a werewolf, and is there to try and help a friend of his who has been captured by the Bloodstone estate for the purpose of the monster hunt. And for who Jack, being the nice guy that he is risking his neck among a bunch of very successful monster hunters. Successfully managing to pass himself off as a monster hunter Jack watches the bizarre freak show that is the mummified corpse of Ulysses Redstone attached to some sort of mechanical contraption that operates him like a puppet. Tell them why they are there. They are there to be sent into a maze, and in the maze is a monster with the redstone attached to it, and they will have to kill the monster if they want to claim the stone, or be killed if they fail. The rest of the rules are explained by Ulysses Bloodstone's rather odd widow, a woman who is both very nuts and very serious about her husband's wishes, and who has already been running things since his demise. Jack and the other monster hunters head off into the maze, and it isn't long before Jack has an encounter with Elsa, and then they are attacked by a big Scottish monster hunter wielding an axe. Elsa then proves that she has Black Widow level skills, and she and Jack escape in separate directions. Apparently, it is fair game to kill off your competitors before they even have a chance to be killed by the monster, since the Bloodstone seems to be a bit like the Holy Grail for monster hunters. In fact, I half expected Indiana Jones to come running through the scene followed by a giant boulder and a group of German soldiers wearing armbands with a strange cross-like shape on them. After all, Adolf would have loved to have got his greasy mitts on this treasure. We follow Elsa for a bit as she has a fight with a hunter who has a wrist-mounted crossbow, and after chopping his arm off with an axe, she uses the wrist-mounted launcher to shoot the hunter. And credit where it's due, they didn't make her out to be superhuman or a Mary Sue-like character, as she was clearly at a strength disadvantage and ended up winning through a combination of luck and skill. I do have a bit of a niggle with the way the monster hunter died though, because the arrow that killed him, which originally appeared to hit him in the throat, was later shown to be going under the bottom of his chin and out through his mouth, which wouldn't have killed him, although it would have certainly been very uncomfortable. Next, Jack makes contact with the monster and tells him to stay alive until he figures out the best way to use an explosive to blow a hole in the wall of the maze and escape. Although why climbing over the wall wasn't an option, I don't know, it just wasn't. Jack then has another meeting with Elsa, in which he finds her locked in her family's mausoleum, and promptly manages to lock himself in with her. Here, they come to a truce whereby he will help her get the Bloodstone if she'll help him free the monster. Elsa and Jack then have a chat about how difficult families can be, something I can attest to, what with having an evil older sister. Then Elsa remembers that her mad Aunt Frances was worried about being entombed while she was alive, and so she had a set of keys put in her box, which were luckily right at the front, so very convenient for Elsa, or otherwise she'd have had to crawl in there with her old aunt's creepy old bones. Jack and Elsa then escape from the mausoleum and again split up, with Elsa going to find the monster, whose name Jack tells her is Ted, and she should treat him like an old friend. He then goes off to use his explosive on a weak bit of the maze wall. Elsa comes across the big Scottish guy while she looks for Ted, and before she can even get her weapon ready, Ted bursts through the hedge and grabs the Scottish guy by the head, and using some heat-based power burns him to a crisp. Ted and Elsa then leg it back the way that Jack went. In the meantime, Jack has been having some incompetent hijinks with the bomb, but eventually Jack manages to actually place it in a crack, just before it goes boom. Elsa and Ted arrive just as the wall comes down, and Ted runs out into the night, but not before Elsa manages to detach the Bloodstone using some kind of grapple that she got from her mad Aunt Frances's grave. Unluckily, the Bloodstone lands near Jack, and when he tries to pick it up, he gets a nasty energy blast that leaves him unable to move. And while he's lying there doing a horizontal jig, the rest of the hunters and Bloodstone's widow appear, and after realizing that he's a monster of some sort, they drag Jack and Elsa off to a big cage in the building's main hall. Elsa is understandably very shaken to find herself trapped in a cage with Jack, because she realizes that Bloodstone's widow intends to use the power of the Bloodstone to force Jack to transform and kill her. But Jack reassures her that he can sometimes control himself after he transforms. Well, he did once anyway. This news was no doubt highly comforting to Elsa. Ulysses Bloodstone's widow comes in and taunts Elsa and Jack for a while, then intending for Jack to kill Elsa as a punishment for abandoning her father, she begins chanting and holding up the stone. Jack then turns into the werewolf, and I have to say, I was extremely disappointed. I know that the movie has a whole noir, black and white oldies kind of look, but honestly the werewolf was laughable. It made Lon Chaney Jr.'s makeup in the film Wolfman from 1941 look amazing. Add that to the fact the guy playing Jack Russell appears to be no more than about 5'4", it just made the fighting scenes at the end look very silly and comical. The werewolf bursts out of the cage and proceeds to kill the widow's men, and while Elsa deals with the monster hunters, it got pretty hard to watch at this point because the werewolf was just not in the slightest bit imposing or scary. What I wanted was more this than this. Anyway, the werewolf chooses not to hurt Elsa and runs off, which leaves Elsa at the mercy of Bloodstone's widow, and things were looking pretty bleak until Ted suddenly drops through the roof and char grills the woman. Elsa then points Ted in the direction Jack took off, and all's well that ends well. So after all that, did I like the movie? Well, yes and no. On the one hand, it is kind of a fun, goofy little experiment, but on the other hand, it is pretty bad as monster movies go. If it wasn't for Ted, there would have been nothing I would seriously characterize as a real possible threat. And even Ted was there mostly for comic relief. Yes, there is a little blood and death, which could arguably make it a bit more adult-orientated, but in all fairness, Monster House was a much scarier, more threatening movie, and that was a cartoon clearly aimed at children. It wasn't even that the acting was bad, it was fine, and in fact the characters were all quite fun, but what it didn't have was any depth, which was no doubt thanks to the short runtime. So, if you really want to watch an old-fashioned monster movie, then go and watch some Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, or Lon Chaney Jr. movies, because that way there is no need for affectations, and you have some truly iconic actors taking the lead roles. That said, if you do happen to come across this movie, and you have a spare hour, then you might just find it interesting enough to give it a glance. At worst, it's boring. At best, it's mildly amusing. Either way, at least you don't have to invest too much time into watching it. Although if you really fancy watching a werewolf movie, then there are some much better offerings. This has been Movies Suck, signing out. Leave a like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the flip side.